yeah, that's a good segue into
And
since we've been talking about a lot about like the diaspora in the past few podcasts at least. I think one of the things we're wondering, Charlene, is what your first of all, what your experience was. Sorry, you weren't born there, right? In the States, were
No,
you?
I was born
Yes,
here.
you were born in the States.
I'm sorry. Yes, I was born in Los Angeles.
Okay.
Hmm.
So just
and
wondering what growing up there was like, because for the Watan boys there, they had an interesting welcoming to the neighborhood. I didn't really experience the same thing, or at least, yeah,
in
not as
terms of
much.
race relations,
Yeah, in terms of
yeah,
racism
race
and then
relations.
discrimination against, first of all, being Filipino and then being Igorot as well,
Hmm.
amongst other Filipinos. So, yeah, what was your experience around that, or has it been good, or I don't know.
I think for me, I've been very like fortunate to not really share too many negative experiences. I don't know if it's generational, maybe even if you know if women versus men experience different things, or girls versus boys. But to sum it up quickly, I was born in LA.
Mm.
We lived in two different suburbs of LA when I growing up. So and in those areas there were a lot of Filipinos. The first city that I lived in is West Covina, and just like down the street back then, it was mixed, but I had, like, when I would go to school, I had like one Filipino classmate. We were, I think, of course, predominantly I went to an Episcopal private school as a child.
Wow.
um yeah, there was not many, but where IIC was held was my
Oh, really?
elementary school.
How was your school?
St. Martha's. Yeah, there were only three of us, so
Yeah.
the two other Filipinos outside of my class were my cousins, Jeff Hawaiian and Leslie Ocab. So so anyway, so it kind of, I was fortunate to grow up around other Filipinos. So as a child, I didn't really see, we had black, white, Mexican, Indian, everything. So I don't know if that's just because I'm in Southern California or whatnot. So I never really grew up with that. I just knew about, and being born into a bebop and Episcopal, like Filipino Episcopal organization that we had at our church. I was just surrounded by people of my skin tone and my culture and everything. And so when we moved from West Covina to Chino Hills, which is another suburb just east of West Covina, um, I encountered a lot more Filipinos um, that also did the same local migration that a lot of Filipinos that I was going to, mostly junior high. It's like, like in elementary school, you're kind of mixed with whatever kids you have, doesn't matter what race you are. Junior high, high school is when you start to like kind of split off, and then all the Filipinos are together, all the white people, and that's like when everyone's segregated a lot more. That was my experience in terms of junior high. I think my group of friends in elementary were, there's white, black, and Filipino, and then by the time we reached junior high, it was hard to keep that little circle together because then everybody started to separate. You have periods and all that, like different periods, and everyone's all separated and stuff.
Oh,
And so you don't have the same friends. And then the only like not the only negativity that I did experience, it was more of that like awestruck. Oh, what, you're Igorot? Because mind you, that's when I was in high school. That's when I started, of course, hanging out with more of the, like, we just sitting around all the other Filipino kids, your class. And so I remember that's when AOL Instant Messenger was just starting out. So then everybody
wow.
had like their screen names and everything. So
Wow.
my
AOL.
screen name, yeah,
Hmm.
my screen name was Lady Igorot, like Lady Igorot 4. And
Right.
so when you're sharing those with each other, like it's like, oh, most of them are Pinay this, Pinay that. But and back then too, I already had like a sense of pride in being Igorot, through, because back by that time I was already performing with Bebop, and so, you kind of, I always had this sense of pride, and I wanted to, like, kind of show off and or say something and about being a guru. But then they're like, and I would hear like people say, oh, what does your screen name mean? Oh, that you're a guru? Like, are you guys headhunters? Like, aren't the people with tails. And so I'm like, what
We
are you
are.
talking about? You know, then 4 years later, like later down the road when my classmates were doing their, and again, like our in Chino Hills, there's a big Catholic church, predominantly Filipino congregation, like hundreds and hundreds of, Filipinos that attend. And so they would have a Philippine cultural night. That was my first take or my first experience in anything like that. And
Right.
so later on, I said, a couple of my other classmates that would say like, "Oh, you're Igor. Like I'm doing your dance in at PCN at St. Paul." And I was like, "Oh, what dance are you doing?" It's like, the eagle dance. And I was like, "What eagle dance?" And
Which
so,
one?
and so I'm just like, "What do you don't know when like the girls?" I was like, "I have no idea what you're talking about," and of course, we were like fortunate to go continually to like we had the Phil-Am groups that are here go and participate in some of those performances, but it's hard. Again, being a teenager, you just go, you perform, you leave. That's kind of it. You don't really know the impact of that you're displaying, like our culture to these people who are coming, that are wanting to come see it. So we didn't really have a lot of this discussion until later on, until everyone's like, yeah, does everyone think that we're like headhunters? And like even got that when I started at my job, which I've been at for 10 years, which I guess that's another segue too. But I work as a lab tech in a biology lab for the sanitation districts of LA County. And so when I first started 11 years ago now, I met a couple of my Filipino coworkers. There's, quite a few of us. And then I said I was Igorot. And like the response back then, of course, is I didn't know it. We didn't know each other and didn't have any more discussion. But at that time, one of my coworkers said, "Oh, I learned about you guys in school," because she was born in the Philippines. And I was like, "I'm pretty sure you didn't really learn anything that was like truthful to," she's like, "Oh, I learned about Igorot," and and but it took years of conversation to understand each other's culture because she's from the island of Negros, and so she, so we kind of like have had that exchange. And so I think that I've been very fortunate to have not experienced a lot of any forms of, not really racism, but it was just a lot of stereotyping was the that I've experienced. And it makes me laugh because some of these people who have said those things to me in high school, I'll never forget who they were, because some of them have actually turned around and have had a successful business in Filipino cuisine at a restaurant, in LA. And so I'm just like, wait, and using kind of that there's a lot of Filipinos that are really looking for that decolonization of their Philippine identity in terms of the Philippine American diaspora, just the general, there. And so, I mean, and I've seen a lot of different types of, I think that a lot of the discrimination or more the stereotypical statements that are made, it's just a reflection of who their parents were, I think, because, and, my only experiences were in stories of my parents who, they would like get made fun of because they couldn't speak Tagalog when they went to college. And so that's why they all learned Tagalog, but they can't speak it the way a true, and that was another thing that I remember when my high school friends who are, Filipino, and I brought my niece around. They said, "Oh, is she full, Is she full?" And I said, "Oh yeah, she's half Igorot, half Tagalog." And then they were like, "What does that mean?" And I was like, "Oh, you don't you don't distinguish between." And so to them, they're just like, "Oh, she's Filipino." But, to me, it's like, "Oh, yeah, she's half Igorot, half Tagalog." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't realize that there was that people don't discern where they're from in terms of the Philippines." So anyway, that's kind of my gist and my experiences. But I've been fortunate to not have too many negative ones outside of just just comments here and there. But and sometimes they're, when we're out dancing and about to go perform, people still say stuff that are just kind of like, "Oh," it's like, you just need to keep walking, but overall I've been very lucky that it's been positive. But I think growing up in a place like LA has helped.
Yeah.
So,
Very interesting.
I think
No doubt.
yeah, you had the same experience as me because of the multiculturalism of the area that you grew up in. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and yeah, I think yeah we just missed out on those times that you guys were experiencing.
Yeah, maybe like a decade earlier. If you
I think
guys
so too.
came like a decade or two earlier, then you would have experienced maybe different things.
Different things, right?
Yeah, it was strange when the 80s, especially in the 80s, like in San Francisco, even as diverse as it was, still had a lot of weird stuff.
I think
Do you know what
back
I
in
mean?
the
Yeah.
80s and 90s too, like, I mean, there was a lot of, think the gang life was a lot more prevalent. And I feel
Yeah,
like
definitely.
that kind of like took over in terms of being an American, like a kid here, because even growing
Mhm.
up in Chino Hills is a suburb, but we were very aware of like, yeah, I was very aware in the early 90s of what gangs were what. And
Yeah.
even when I want to go visit my cousins, my Auntie Gloria and her kids, um, I was like, do I not wear red? Like when I go out there, thinking that I'm going to be, I was like, what do I do? But that back then, that was already something that,
Yeah.
but I
The
didn't
90s, man.
experience it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't experience it, but it was something that was, I think, part of the culture, and especially you guys growing up, because I hear, stories from Mike and everybody, the older generation,
Yeah.
and it was very different back then.
Well, methamphetamine seemed to take care of a lot of that gang issue amongst
Yeah,
some people.
It did.
Uh,
It's
you
kind of
know,
crazy, man.
whether the government planted it or we just like, smelt it and like, hey, we can manufacture this on our own. Oh,
Mhm.
gosh. Um, yeah. Yeah, that was definitely kind of like the trendy thing to do. And when you look at it also, I mean, a lot of that culture looks at the fact that, you're trying to create a semblance of identity and family in ways that makes you feel very significant. And
Mhm.
well, that's a quite a big way to make you feel significant, considering that well, maybe there's another way, but it's quite harder. Not only do you have to overcome someone else's privilege, but you actually have to kind of like work your way into, and there has to be resources in there that help put you in a place where maybe you might be able to get an education, or maybe you might actually think about being entrepreneurial,
Mhm.
um, and and function in a system that seems quite, and you have to overcome also the voice in your head that says that you're not good enough either,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
take responsibility for your stuff. And so there's a lot of stuff, that the factors that go on, but certainly I think that generations are different now. One thing that I've
Yes.
noticed, like when we were kids, like Mark and I, when we were younger, there were no such thing as after school programs. You
Mhm.
just let your kids walk home, take the bus, and make
Run
sure they
around.
have a key to open the door. And when they come home, they might do their homework.
Right.
Nowadays we have after school programs, we have
Mhm.
sports programs, we have martial arts programs, we have all kinds of stuff, that art programs, music programs that are set up for our kids, certain structure for our kids that didn't exist back in the day.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was like, it was born out of the fact that, hey, we don't want our kids just hanging around and trying to find family this way. We want them to find family in ways that are
Oh.
authentic. I mean,
Mhm.
authentically, at least have a certain wholesomeness that's much more sustainable, and that'll actually push you up, uh and help you gain significance and meaning in much more healthy ways. I think that that's part of what I think we've seen, because like when I pick up my kids at school now, which my job is flexible enough where I can do something like that. Well, I'm not the only one who does that. A
Mhm.
lot of parents do this now, or they put their kid in the after school program,
Mhm.
or the music program, or the martial arts, or the sports program, and then they pick their kids up later. But you don't see as much of the kids walking home latchkey as it was back
Not
in the day.
anymore. Oh no,
Yeah,
I would think that it would be extremely frowned
because
upon.
we remember our experience, and it's like, oh no, I don't want them to get jumped on the bus, you
Mhm.
know. Um, And so my kid only hears about these stories. He asked
Oh
me a
God.
couple weeks ago, "Hey, was it much more dangerous back then or now?" I was like, "Oh no, back then, back
Mhm.
then, back then."
Mhm.
Was much
Maybe it's
more.
dangerous in a different way now. Like you
Very,
got stuff
yeah.
like cyberbullying and stuff. We never had to deal with that stuff, but yeah, definitely. If you're walking home, always got to watch out, man.
Yeah.
Ah,
And I think that's where, I mean, yeah, I feel like maybe because you guys were guys, but at the same time, I know a lot of girls that are really tough, and like just as many girls getting into fights, like my cut, and
Oh, right.
but I was just a few years shy of that type of lifestyle, and
mm,
but yeah, I mean, I was close enough to hear about other people's direct experiences, but yeah.
right. Right.
Things have definitely changed,
Hmm.
for sure.
I
In
mean,
how
and
we.
I like, sorry, I feel like that's what back then the bebops were a lot maybe stronger. Maybe the parents knew, the parents had to have known. I mean, my brother-in-law was sent back to the Philippines for like at least a year because he was getting into too much trouble around, and I mean, and that was another common thing that I heard other Filipino parents did with their
Mhm.
kids. But
Yeah.
outside of that, I think that that